Agradecemos a todas las autoridades, invitados e invitadas que nos acompañan hoy, así como también a quienes se nos suman a partir de ahora por la transmisión a través de MOL TV y por el canal de YouTube del Centro de Innovación de la Universidad Católica. Les damos a todos y a todas la bienvenida a Innovación 2050 presenta a Otto Scharmer, Liderando el futuro emergente. Para compartir con ustedes, estaremos recibiendo todas sus preguntas a través de Twitter con el hashtag Otto2050. Esta clase magistral es traída a ustedes por Fundación Colunga, Imago Global Grassroots y el Centro de Innovación, con la colaboración de Corfo y el Presencing Institute. Esta alianza responde al desafío de promover la innovación social y el cambio sistémico de manera transversal, convocando a todos los actores de la sociedad chilena. Los últimos años, lo sabemos, han estado marcados por cambios profundos, algunos de ellos repentinos, y sin duda todos muy importantes. En este momento de disrupción, como bien se mencionaba anteriormente, resulta tremendamente oportuno y muy afortunado contar con la presencia y las reflexiones de nuestro invitado. Otto Scharmer es el reconocido autor de la teoría U, profesor, escritor e investigador. Impulsa la creación de innovaciones en el aprendizaje y el liderazgo, gatillando procesos de cambio en organizaciones empresariales, gubernamentales y de la sociedad civil. Presentando hoy su clase magistral, Liderando el futuro emergente, con ustedes, Otto Scharmer.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much for the invitation, for hosting me, making you part of your conversation. I have been here in Chile for the first time 5 years ago, 2017. And now coming back 5 years on, it's amazing what you have been accomplishing in that short period, because I think a profound shift has happened in that period that in so many other countries and so many other communities and so many other regions of the world is about to happen too. So I feel like that what's happening here in Chile is at the forefront of a wave of profound societal innovation that you're co-pioneering here, and it's a real privilege for me to be here, mainly as a learner, kind of for this week, and talk to many of the respective change makers and next generation leaders who are really co-pioneering this next wave of innovation that we all know kind of our situation is calling for, and also our planet is calling for. So thank you for having me. And I want to share a little bit before we move into the conversation around leading in times of disruption, right? What does that really mean? And how it kind of requires us to develop a new capacity of learning, which is not just learning from the past, which is kind of what we all know how to do, but learning by sensing and actualizing emerging future possibilities. And that's a little bit what I want to invite you to. And so the image that you see is basically an image that is depicting what everyone is talking about, and that's what I believe is really the best depiction of our current situation, which is we live in a moment of disruption. And so is there, let me just, oops. So All right. So on the left side, if you depict us there, that's current reality, right? And disruption means something very simple. The future is going to be different, right? Different to our current state. So that's kind of depicted on the right side. We know a lot less about the future, but what we know least about often is how to get from here to there. So what allows us to actually connect to emerging future possibilities and make them happen now? And that's the question that has been always organizing my work. That's what I want to share a little bit. And the perspective that I'm taking is it takes a journey. It takes a journey that's both an outer journey and an inner journey. And the outer journey, as all of you who are involved in change making and innovation know. So if you want to learn about innovation, where do you go? You go to the edges of the system, right? Kind of where you see kind of what's happening. You see the new much more clearly than when you are stuck in the center. And so you basically begin to sense and see your own system from the edges, from interesting places where something new is happening. And the inner journey basically is a journey of connecting to our deeper sources of knowing, which are always there, but not always attended to by us as change makers and as leaders. So that's a little bit the invitation. So this kind of outer inner journey is depicted kind of through this U process a little bit here, and we're going to unpack that just a little bit. If you look, so the background that I'm talking from is systems thinking, right, and looking at leadership and change from a systems view. So what do you see when you look at it from a systems view, right? You see that in most systems, we collectively create results that pretty much no one wants, right? What are examples of that? Well, examples are, the ecological divide, and the number here is 1.6, right? We use, so the ecological divide is really disconnect between self and nature. And we use resources in the amount of 1.6 times the regeneration capacity of planet Earth, right? So by definition, that's not sustainable, right? It's the overshoot. And then there's the social divide, inequality. So that's kind of where a big shift happened here, kind of becoming more aware of that. I'm coming to you from a country, the United States, where that awakening is also beginning to happen around racial inequality, but it's also very much in the beginning, right? I think you're kind of much more courageous, really, in facing that head on and the processes that you started over the past 2-3 years. So what's the number here? 1.7. So the social divide is inequality, right? Polarization, but also kind of more and more violence, right? You have, places like the U.S., you could say, are really falling apart into communities, that to some degree move towards a civil war. In Europe, you already have the war, and in other places going on. So we are really in a situation where what used to be a cohesive social whole is breaking into pieces. And our job is to weave it back together, right? Pieces that are already falling apart, right? And 1.7, what's that? $1.7 trillion. That's the net asset growth for the billionaires in the US over the past 2 years. In 2 years, the billionaire class in the US had a net asset growth of 57%, right? So it's kind of, they had a plus. They already came into the crisis with all their billions, right? And since then, there was a net asset growth of 57%, so $1.7 trillion. While at the same time, 200 million people worldwide went into extreme poverty and hunger. So that's, and how can you explain that? Well, can I explain that when some people kind of put in a lot more effort? Obviously not, right? So obviously, this kind of shows us something is broken with the entire system that needs to be reimagined and redesigned. The spiritual divide, which is not a disconnect between self and nature, self and other, but a disconnect between self and self. A number there, and that's all about mental health, right? So we have that in so many countries. 44% of high school students in the US are reporting extreme hopelessness about their current situation and the future, and symptoms of anxiety and depression. So we live in a collective condition of, or in a condition of collective depression, where in many ways we move from a denial of the situation directly into hopelessness, right? It's too late. And that's what we as change makers face. Kind of that's the work surface we got to address one way or another. So why? So what is it? So we collectively enact results that no one wants. What are those results? 1.6, 1.7, 44. No one gets up in the morning and looks into the mirror and says, okay, and today I want to harm more the planet, harm more other people, and harm more myself. No one does that, right? Yet somehow collectively we organize our system in a way where more of that is happening. And so systems thinking is asking the questions why, right? So why is that? Why keep we doing this? And these words you see here, structure and paradigms of thought, and then kind of the deeper sources we are operating from, they're different layers of root issues that we need to address in order to understand and kind of change these deeper dimensions. And when you take all of them together, that's kind of something that I call awareness-based systems change. And you can summarize that approach with 4 simple principles. Number 1, you cannot understand a system unless you change it. Famously, Kurt Lewin, kind of the founder of action learning and action research, claimed that. And that's very much something that inspired me kind of to move 25 years ago from Germany to the US, to MIT, to join kind of a group that was working in that tradition, systems thinking, action learning, and action research. The question then is, okay, so if that's true, how do you change a system, right? So you cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. Let me rephrase. You cannot change a system unless you transform the mindsets of the people who are enacting these systems. And pretty much we all know that. That's kind of with these, with less than 10 words of the sentence, it's summarizing my past 25 years of action research and being involved in a whole bunch of projects. And I see from the nodding that's also true for many of you. Yeah, so today, real systems change needs to move beyond tinkering with structures and systems and kind of address the deeper mindsets. So, all right, then the question is, how do we do that? And here's what we learned, right? And when I say we, it's kind of the whole kind of community around the Presencing Institute and awareness-based systems change. It's a globally distributed community that keeps on exploring these questions with practical experiments. So you cannot transform consciousness unless you make a system sense and see itself. Or we already know that, right, from our personal relationships. So when you or I go through a transformation change, what do? We talk to a friend. We talk to a coach. We talk to somebody who can listen to us, mirror something back. But in society, the key institutions that need to transform today, we are lacking kind of this kind of corresponding infrastructures. And that's really what we have been focusing on, kind of particularly around the Presencing Institute, kind of for innovating, creating methods and tools for that. And I'm going to show you a bunch of that a little later. And then lastly, you cannot lead systems transformation unless you sense and actualize the future. So the most important word, again, is the sensing, right? So if we don't feel the future, we cannot embody it. And if we cannot embody it, we cannot make other people to move into this direction. So that's like really a key. And in my view, leadership, the word leadership, does not mean what do the people at the top are doing. Leadership, from a systems view, is something different. It's the capacity of a system to sense and shape the future, right? It's the capacity of a system to deal with disruptive change, right? Because if you meet disruptive change, you need to sense the future and make it happen, bring it into reality. And of course, all real entrepreneurs already know that. All real innovators already know that. But how to really foster that capacity on a whole systems level, that's, I think, the challenge. And even on a societal level, that's the challenge that you're up against, that we are up against in so many communities, in so many countries right now. So what have we learned? Here's one thing that I learned. And that's a quote from a colleague in the United States that I interviewed, kind of the longtime CEO of Hanover Insurance, Bill O'Brien, who summarized his many years of leading transformational change. The success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So he basically says, the success of what I do as a change maker depends on not only what I do, not on the how, but depends on the inner place from that I operate. In other words, the quality of my presence, the quality of my attention, the quality of my listening, how I show up, right, in a situation, how I am present with, that's what makes all the difference. So that really taught me, and so that taught me that there is kind of a whole deeper level of leadership that I wasn't aware of previously. A few weeks ago, I co-hosted an event at the UN where we had Christiana Figueroa speak. And I think she is one of the most inspiring leaders of our time as the key architect, as many of you know, of the Paris Agreement, and really a driving force helping us to move from the collapse of Copenhagen 2009 to the Paris Agreement in 2015, which is an amazing accomplishment, kind of that we have successful put into place. So one of her key insights is basically the same of what Bill O'Brien says, which is that working on yourself is the only thing you can control. So if everything, basically disruption means a lot is happening around you that you don't have control over, right? So what's left for you? Working on yourself. Changing the inner place that you're operating from. Well, what is that? What does that really mean? So what does that landscape look like? And here's how I would describe this landscape, which is it's a landscape that is mapped by three capacities: opening the mind, opening the heart, and opening the will, aka accessing our curiosity, compassion, and courage. And what does that do? It moves us beyond this kind of downloading thing at the beginning of the ULET. Downloading means same old, right? So whatever happens, I respond based on our standard operating procedures. But with open mind, what we really mean is the capacity to see with fresh eyes, right? And to really look again and to notice kind of what's new, what's different in this situation. What we mean with open heart is the capacity to empathize, to look at a problem not just from your angle, but through the eyes of your key stakeholders, kind of that you're working with. And what we mean with open will is basically the capacity to let go of the past and let come of emerging future possibilities. That, we believe, is pretty much the deeper territory of leadership. Now, okay, but now if I look at this from my own context, right, North America, USA, and a bunch of other places, what do we see? The exact opposite of everything I just talked to you, right? It's not the opening of the mind, heart, will, but a freeze reaction of the mind, heart, will, aka an amplification of ignorance, hate, and fear. And rather than, on the lower U curve, which is really based on connecting with what's happening around us in a deeper way, which is not just here, but also sensing into that and feeling into emerging opportunities. What you see on the upper curve of absencing really is disconnecting, right, from what we see, right? Denial, right? Disconnecting from what we feel, getting stuck in our own echo chambers. And yes, there are kind of like so many examples of that. So basically what I'm saying is this. When we meet disruption, right, when we meet an instance of disruption, and that's pretty much the only thing we know will increase in the future, right? We don't know what the future will bring, but disruption is going to go up, right? That's the one thing we know. So when we face instances of disruption, we have a choice. We as leaders, we as change makers, we as society have a choice. We can respond by turning away and closing down, or turning toward and opening up. When we turn away, we activate one part, one type of process that by now we all know pretty well. And when we turn toward and open up, we activate another kind of process that by now we also know pretty well. The upper process, right, the first one, the one that's disconnecting, is basically grounded in an architecture of disconnection, right? It's disconnecting us from what's happening around us, but also from our own, vertically, from our own highest future possibilities. And it's giving rise to a social grammar of destruction, right? Kind of that kind of cycle that's moving into blaming and destruction, self-destruction. We know, right? We have seen it too often. We know kind of how that is reinforced, and that's kind of at the end of that. And that's, of course, what's on a collective level happens, on many levels, how we kind of connect with the and disconnect with the planet and so forth. And it's great. It's basically fueled by an awareness that I call ecosystem awareness, and I don't mean that in a moral way. I mean that in a technical way. I mean that it's an awareness that is stuck inside one's own boundaries. You cannot move beyond. You don't feel and see what's happening around you. That's what I mean with ego, right? And on the lower side, if you analyze that, it's based on an architecture of connection, right? Including like societal kind of social connection. It's giving rise to a social grammar of co-creation that we know kind of from so many experiences ourselves, right? It's also very real. And it's fueled by and animated by an awareness that I refer to as ecosystem awareness, by which I mean an awareness that can move beyond the boundaries of one's own organization, right? To sense by opening the mind, opening the heart, opening the will, basically by connecting to the other beings, right, in my ecosystem more profoundly and more deeply. So I think that's basically our current work surface that we face, right? And the real question on the table is this: how do we transform and regenerate, right? Particularly what's happening on the upper side of this presentation. And I think one way of describing that is that what we need to learn to do, and it was really interesting to me to hear stories of what has been happening here over the past few years, because I could see a lot of parallel what has been happening around institutional racism in the US, right? So there's a lot in parallel, really. And what it really is, what it means for us as leaders, as educators, and as change makers is learning to address our blind spots. And I think there are three major blind spots at issue here, which is not seeing, and that's really a blind spot that is about denial and disinformation, and it's basically about a disconnection between mind or my own kind of sense-making and the world. Then it is sensing, so not feeling something, right? I see something, but it's just stuck. It's just abstract knowledge in my head. Yeah, I know there's inequality in society, but do I really feel it? Do I really empathize with that? No, it's stuck here. So that's the second problem. And it's kind of a disconnect between self and other, right? And it has to do with kind of not accessing the knowing of our heart. And then the third problem we all know is this one. It's kind of not acting. So that's apathy, right? I see what's wrong. I know it. I even feel it, right? I have been moved at times. But am I doing something, right? Am I really kind of contributing substantially to the solution? No. So that's the third problem. It's the problem of apathy, and it's the problem of not really activating the full resources of the change that we can bring about. Now, so that's the problem we face. How is that so what are the new capacities? When we really confront these issues, these three blind spots, what are the new capacities that grow out of that? The first one is when we kind of deal kind of on the level of knowing, right, and the mind, it really deals with deepening our scientific activity and listening, right? What is, at the end of the day, science? It's let the data talk to you, right? Don't project your own opinions, right? Let the data talk to you. And the operating question, I think, here is, can you listen with humility? As a leader, as a change maker, how good are you at listening to stuff you don't want to hear? So that's kind of where, so that area of discomfort, right? That's where this capacity begins to grow. And it really is about moving beyond the disconnect between mind and world and realizing kind of mind and world are not separate. Kind of, so there is kind of a much deeper interdependence that we can access. The second one has to do really with a deepening dialogue and democracy. So it's kind of deepening our infrastructures for sense making. And building really architectures of connection. And the individual kind of change maker question here is, can you sense your ecosystem from the edges? So think about kind of your ecosystem of change, kind of the people you need to connect to in order to make your system change. What are the voices missing? And how can you listen to them with real humility and maybe bring them kind of onto at the table and into the conversation? So that's kind of I would say on the relational dimension, kind of new infrastructures that we need to build, new civic infrastructures of connection that we need to build, where we basically move beyond polarization, where we kind of can talk across interests, across ideologies, and across paradigms of thought in order to improve kind of how the system is operating. And I think the third capacity kind of that deals with the non-acting has to do with deepening our co-creativity and action confidence. What I mean with action confidence is not how to do something better, right? What I mean with action confidence is how to step into uncharted territories. Because if you want to cross the abyss, right, the old stuff is no longer working. It requires of you to really move into new territories. And that's kind of a capacity that will become ever more important as we move more deeper into this century. So the organizing question here is, can you sense and embody the future as it emerges, right? Can you feel the future, right? And again, what I mean with future is not something abstract. It's a possibility that depends on you in order to come into reality. So can you feel that? And then can you embody that? Can you bring that into the present moment? And so if you just look at these three questions, which is, can you listen with humility? Can you sense your ecosystem from the edges, right? From the view of the most marginalized? And then can you sense and embody the future as it emerges? Those are, I believe, pointers to the new, deeper capacities that we will need to grow in order to address the next wave of challenges, but also of innovation opportunities that will be coming our way. All right, so how does that work? Well, it's basically, so these three capacities require of us a mindset shift, kind of from an old mindset, which is I'm here, the system is out there, to a new mindset where when I see the system, I not only see the system outside of myself, but I begin to see myself as part of the system and as contributing to the problems that we face. And only when I have that shift, right, from an ego more to an eco view, where I see myself through the eyes of others, we begin to have a conversation that allows for more transformational change. So I want to, and that goes back to the first thing that I mentioned to you. So what is the essence of leadership and systems change from a systems view, right? Developing tools and environments to make systems see and sense themselves, kind of to go through this shift. And I want to give you 3 or 4 quick examples where that works. Because in my experience, it does not take forever, right? It does not take many years. It can happen in a moment, in an instant. But you need enabling environments around that. So here are a few examples. The first one is going on sensing journeys, right? Going on journeys, and this is kind of the top leadership team of one of the biggest, in fact, fintech in the world. And so they went to 2 different countries. So they spent 2 days just listening to all their stakeholders, right? From the regulators to their partners to their customers to unbanked people, kind of people with no resources, no access to financial services in their countries. And then coming back together, so 15 people did that in country A, 15 in country B, and coming back together and share everything what they learned. So it sounds so simple, and it's hard to do because often when we go places, we pontificate, right? We project, we need we maybe overshare, we rarely have the possibility to really be in the position of listening with humility, right? And just taking in and just kind of learning. And so that's but when we do that, and you do that by taking in the views of your entire ecosystem of your organization, it created a profound shift for the way this leadership team was operating, because they moved basically from their own silo view to a much more ecosystem-based view, kind of where they were aware of what it looks like and feels like through the eyes of all the other groups they were impacting with their decisions. This is something, an example from Brazil. So it's kind of a sculpting. So basically, you take objects and you map your system, the current system, and how it's going to change, and have a structured process. It takes, so that's something we'll do also here, kind of with a group of younger leaders later this week. And so it takes a couple of hours, but very quickly it takes a deep scan into the deeper systemic issues and opportunities that a system is facing, and then you can kind of address that much more head on. And it is facilitating a process of collective sense making in a fairly kind of focused amount of time. This is basically the same thing, but now you don't use objects to represent the system, but you use human bodies, right? You tune into that. It's kind of a little bit, some of you may know processes of constellation, kind of, so it's a mindfulness, social science, and constellation a little bit combined, if you want. But what we bring in there is the voice of planet Earth, the voice of the emerging future, and it's really interesting to see the moment you bring in, and the voice of the most marginalized in the system. In other words, you bring in the voices that bring to our awareness the ecological divide, the social divide, the spiritual divide. And when you do that, it's really interesting to see how that is changing the conversation and how that is changing the awareness from which we operate when we move toward decision making. We have done this work with bigger, really very traditional institutions as well, kind of, so it's not only happening in innovative kind of frontline experiences, but also in very established organizations like the UN. And we also have been doing that at scale, kind of, for example, through the MIT XU Lab. We had, over the past few years, more than 200,000 participants that self-organize in more than 2,000 hubs. And I know kind of many of you may have been connected to some of them. But what I want to end with is so it's kind of my maybe summarizing view of what I see around systems change across sectors. And I know kind of you are working in very different sectors, so I want to offer you that as a lens. And one way of really thinking about, well, how does systems change show up in real life? Well, kind of one analogy is kind of, it's like kind of on your device updating the operating system, right? So it's we can think about it in these terms. And so the 4 operating systems I want to bring to your attention is, and that I have seen time and again, are input and authority-centric, 1.0, 2.0, output and efficiency-centric. That's pretty much where we are today, right? The first one is the past. Then in many systems, then 3.0 is outcome and user-centric, and 4.0, that's what we move towards today. But what we really need to move to, in my view, is 4.0, regenerative and ecosystem-centric. So if you look at health and learning, you have today really kind of the processes of evidence-based medicine and testing-driven teaching, which of course is not real learning, but often the absence of real learning, which then leads to 3.0, learner-centric pathways, right? Student-centric architectures of learning, kind of, I see many people nodding, and patient-centric healthcare systems, right? Now you organize the whole damn thing around the patient experience, the patient journey, right? A user-centric view. Now that's the good healthcare system, the good school. Is that good enough? I don't think so. I think what we are moving towards is, with the disruption that happens in this century, is towards, on the health side, not only addressing the issues of sickness, but strengthening the sources of health and well-being. And on the learning side, move away from only addressing the mind towards addressing also the intelligence of the heart and the intelligence of the hand, because a meta function of all learning is to sense and shape the future. And in a moment of disruption, right, you really need to bring in this literacy, and in most cases, we don't have it today. Farm and food, kind of industrial agriculture is 2.0. Then we have organic agriculture, that's a little better, kind of 3.0. But what we really need to work towards is food as medium for healing planet and people. And that's kind of something referred to as regenerative agriculture. Finance, as many of you know, kind of extractive capital is 2.0, think Wall Street. Then today, what are we all talking about? Impact investing, ESG, right? That's a step in the right direction. Is it really addressing the deeper systemic issues? Usually not. So the 4.0 would be really regenerative finance that's addressing the deeper systemic issues, and that requires, right, different mechanisms of funding than what we have today. Then, of course, on the development side, GDP, right? That's kind of still what we are talking about in many cases. But since 1990, as you all know, the UNDP, the first development report, we have the HDI, human development in the center, right? But then last year, or kind of a couple of years ago, the second last human development report is really about shifting that from human-centric well-being to human and planetary well-being. That's really the paradigm shift we see in the development paradigm, which is more and more kind of also sinking into the institutions. At the end of the day, what does this all amount to? Governance, of course, right? So we have moved from traditional forms of governance, the visible hand and the invisible hand, to organized interest groups, right? In most countries today, we have kind of very small groups really influencing and hijacking collective decision-making. Certainly that's the case in the US, right, when you see what happens around gun laws and sustainability and so forth. But what we really need to move towards is something I call CASA, which is collective action from shared awareness, right, where you bring together the key stakeholders, where you apply a systemic process of understanding the root issues and then addressing them, kind of innovate to learn by doing. And that's, I think, what we see, what we are in the beginning of now. Lastly, social sector, right? The social and civic sector. So there's kind of the beginning of all movements often is kind of reactive protesting. You're reacting against symptoms of something that's broken, right? That's the starting point in many cases. But then to have lasting impact, right, we need to include the other levels, which is 2.0, advocacy, policies and programs, right, really addressing kind of these issues in a more tangible, direct way, on the levels of systems. But then when you, move more upstream, you really need to engage the stakeholders. So the stakeholders, for example, working with business around supply chain issues, right, with responsible businesses, or bringing in more direct democracy, kind of participative components into democracy is another way of, on the political side, the state, the government side, to bring in more kind of the civic or social sector voice. But what I believe we really need to do in the end is to move towards cross-sector systems transformation that helps us to reimagine and reshape from shared awareness, and that is more inclusive. And that, I think, kind of what you have been doing and moving towards here in the last 2 years is an inspiring example into that direction. So what I'm basically saying is something simple. As we face 4.0 problems, challenges of disruption that we haven't seen on this planet before, what we see in society is response mechanisms that are stuck in 1.0, 2.0, and sometimes 3.0. And what we need to do as innovators is more than that. We need to develop the capacity to operate on 4.0. And if you kind of look at 4.0, these kind of, I don't know, 7, 8 categories are not different. They are all moving into the same deeper domain of collaboration and co-creation. So that's a missing enabling infrastructure on 4.0 that where I believe the primary leverage point is for large-scale societal collective change on the level of systems today. So basically, I started with a question. All right, how do we do this, right? Crossing this abyss. And on a personal level, it includes kind of this opening the mind, the heart, the will. But on a collective level, it also includes this deeper 4.0 related enabling collaborative learning and leadership infrastructures. So in summary, if we want to do this, right, that's what we need, what we try to do in this century, which is, as a community, planetary healing and civilizational regeneration, because that's really what's happening, right, on a larger level. Then I believe the only way of doing that, right, and you could put a lot of things on the top left, right, Sustainable Development Goals and Paris Agreement and so on. The only way of doing that is by activating generative social fields, or social fields of co-creation among the stakeholders, right, that move from polarization to working together in a way that's co-creative. That's what we need to, that's the how, right? And in change management and change leadership, the only way, the only thing we have learned the past 80 years is, the only way to do that is by having a support infrastructure, right? None of us is going through transformational change without a support infrastructure. That's something that I call school for transformation. You can call that whatever you want. It doesn't matter, but it needs to be something that is supporting us along the way. Otherwise, we are instantly sucked back into the old system. So that's, any kind of movement is only successful if you have a supporting infrastructure. And what does this infrastructure do? It is democratizing access for the methods and tools of transformation, right, for transformation literacy. And secondly, it's building the capacity for collective action from shared awareness. Because those are new capacities that we as humans haven't developed at the level of scale necessary today. And to do that, we need an enabling infrastructures. And I think that's what is a key leverage point for us as a collective movement to succeed in bringing our aspirations that we're holding for the future into reality. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Les invito a permanecer un momento más en sus asientos. Vamos a empezar una ronda de preguntas. Otto, thank you very much. I'd like you to stay on the stage. I'd like to have a little conversation with you in English. I'll do my very, very best. I have a couple questions from the public. I'm going to read it in Spanish and then I'll translate for you so that you can answer. La primera pregunta que nos llegó para Otto Scharmer es: como país estamos viviendo muchos cambios y eso genera incertidumbre. ¿Cómo desde la teoría U podemos transitar en ese miedo a los cambios? So, first question. As a country, we're going through lots of change and that creates uncertainty. How can we, using the U theory, deal with the fear of change?
I would say by creating support structures that allow us to amplify positive connections. If you remember what I said I mean, if you remember kind of the two cycles, the cycle of absencing and self-destruction, and then the cycle of presencing. So what is it that's dominating our public awareness and media? The upper one, right? But what is it that's kind of our real-life experience that we often feel is there, right, kind of where the new is? It's the lower one. But we don't have an amplification mechanism for the lower one. So what is supporting us? I think a fear of change, yes, there is, I think we need support from each other, kind of from people who go through the same kind of process, where we can help each other with deep listening, kind of with engaging in new practices, and supporting each other in the real change processes. It's very actually organizable, and so if we provide these human support structure among change makers, it can go a long way. And then, of course, I'm not saying that's all, right? There's a lot, of course, what needs to happen on the macro level, right? As we transform our economies, evolve our governance systems, and also reimagine, reshape our education systems. But, you know, I think the fear of change is often, you know, let's say one thing. Not everyone suffers fear of change, right? Because for many of us, there's so much pressure today, so much pain that no, I don't have fear of change, right? I want to move into that. I feel kind of a lack of support to actually what helps me to take the next step. So that's what I'm talking about. So it's collaboration and learning and support infrastructure that are accessible for me in my community, in my region, in my reach, that allow me to get access to the resources that I need to take the next step.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to read the second question. Segunda pregunta para Otto Scharmer. Desde la línea de la innovación, ¿cuáles son las capacidades y estructuras habilitantes que permiten innovar en estos tiempos de cambios e incertidumbre? Second question. From the point of view of innovation, what are the enabling capacities and structures that allow us to innovate in these times of change and uncertainty?
The enabling capacities and structures. Well, I think I talked about the enabling capacities in terms of the listening, kind of the sensing, and the action confidence, kind of having the capacity to step into new territories. And the infrastructures kind of that support that are often missing, right? And are often missing, most importantly, where they are. So when we have them, they tend to exist inside organizations and institutions. But where they are most needed today is actually across institutions, right? And even across sector boundaries. Because for most challenges we face today, no one can deal with alone. No organization can deal with alone. We need to bring others on board, and we need kind of enabling infrastructures for that. So I think the infrastructures we have a profound gap of enabling infrastructures, particularly around sense-making. There's a lot of sense-making going on in society today. There's a lack of making sense on a deeper level, collectively, kind of together with others, the partners in my system that I'm already connected with in real processes, but that are in my mind blocked out because I don't see them, I don't feel them, and I don't experience them in my everyday life. And these are kind of the enabling infrastructures, bringing those people together digitally or in real time, and then having a process that allows us to move to a place where we want to be, which is not a place where we each talk from our own silo, but a place of shared sense-making and shared co-creating.
Thank you very much. Seguramente nos hemos quedado con más preguntas, más ganas de hablar acerca de pensamiento sistémico, más ganas de hablar acerca de innovación. Para ello les invito a seguir las redes sociales de Otto Scharmer y también los canales digitales de las organizaciones que nos unimos para hacer este encuentro, la Fundación Colunga, Imago Global Grassroots y el Centro de Innovación de la Universidad Católica. Les agradezco a todos por su asistencia, por su atención. Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.